Hi there, and welcome to Quick Tips for Teaching. I'm your host, Jenna Camp, and today we're talking about mastery learning. Mastery-based learning is an instructional practice wherein the standards for the skills and knowledge required to master course objectives are established sequentially for each scholar to learn and to demonstrate mastery of before moving on to the next standard skill or knowledge point. It seems fairly common sense for a lot of educators, but like anything else, mastery learning can be done well or it can be done poorly. The difference lies in how well prepared you are to modify your own teaching practices. And this is my argument about mastery-based learning. You do need to modify your teaching practices. There are multiple considerations that you will need to ruminate on before switching or pivoting to mastery-based learning if you're not doing that already. Now, of course, any of our curriculum, any time we're in the classroom teaching, we have these three elements that we're always moving around in between and coordinating: instruction, practice, and assessment. Mastery learning is where those all meet in the middle here. And I will argue that mastery learning really requires that we focus on differentiated instruction. I'll talk more about universal design later. That scholars have ample and varied practice with their knowledge and skills and objectives, and that there is multiple formative and summative assessment, that formative assessment is going to be really useful and the feedback required for scholars to truly master a skill or objective. So you might need to really consider just how regimented or not you need your curriculum to be. Some teachers are operating under pacing guides or guaranteed viable curriculums, the GVCs, and a lot of those build in mastery learning in theory. Again, it depends on how things are actually taught and implemented in the classroom. A lot of scholars are also in AP courses, right? So if you're teaching an AP class, then you have end of course exams that you have to make sure your scholars are prepared for. And those end of course exams really drive curriculum in a lot of cases. You may also need to consider your classroom management style. What about your routines, resources, and rules can allow you to make a pivot to mastery-based learning as opposed to point-based learning or project-based learning? How predictable are your routines and how predictable do you want them or need them to be? What about your resources? Are you able to be flexible with resources in order to meet different scholars' needs for practice and formative assessment? And what about the rules in your classroom? What about those connections are you making that can assist scholars during their mastery learning? And then, of course, the why and how of learning in your own subject matter. What are the learning objectives like in your discipline? Is learning linear? And many would argue, I would argue, that learning isn't always linear. Mastery learning establishes a linear, sequential focus. You have to master this standard before you master that standard. Before you go on to the next standard, you have to have these foundational standards mastered and proven first. Not all learning, not all disciplines are like that. So you have to consider your own discipline and your own teaching styles. So once you make those considerations, mastery learning may require a complete redesign of your classroom. A lot of teachers go to the flipped classroom model, where they're providing instructional videos that scholars look at as homework or home fun, and then they come to class and they are doing the practice in class. They have a lot more teacher-scholar conferences with that kind of a design, and you can use portfolios and exhibitions as other ways to demonstrate mastery, not just through exams. It might also mean that you have to look at your rubrics and make sure that you review with scholars and that they understand the rubrics that they're using. I've even had scholars create rubrics together with me in class, and that the rubrics are consistently and flexibly used. So I might only use one section to assess this section or this one standard, even though the rubric may address more than one standard. So I need to be really cognizant of how I'm using the rubrics as well. And of course, that universal design for learning for differentiated instruction. If we're really working towards mastery of all of the different standards of my discipline, then I need to make sure that I am providing instructional resources and delivering lessons in ways that are meaningful and accessible for all of my scholars. If all scholars have to meet and master these objectives, then I have to master how I am preparing them to do so. And of course, that variety of assessments again becomes just as critical. For more quick tips, check out jennacamp.com. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Jenna Camp Educational, and on my Twitter at Educational Camp. Don't forget to check out Thinkorswim on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And I thank you so much for joining me today.